great turnout, actually. Quite a few more people than I thought. My name is Ken Flood. I'm Planning Director for Columbia County. And from the Planning Office, Patrice Berry, Senior Planner, and Maureen Gardner, we make up the whole planning department for the county. And I'm only part-time, so it's really Patrice and Maureen. So this is a meeting to receive public input regarding the design and location of a trail to connect Hudson and North 2nd with the Greenport Conservation Area, of which CLC, Christine and Peter Hayden are here from the CLC. And it's based on a plan that CLC did 10 years ago? 10 years ago. So we're moving at the speed of light here. But the county, CLC, the city, we all agreed to work, believe it or not, together to take a look at this area. It is, as probably I assume everybody knows, it is the old Hudson landfill. It's been closed for, I don't know, 20 years or so. And obviously with regulations and sensitivity to the integrity of the landfill, we have to be very careful in how we bring people to the area, and even if we can, at a reasonable cost, can we or can't we? DEC will be the final say on that in terms of yes or no, and then we'll move forward from there. But we're here to receive your input, what's good, what's bad. I wrote an grant application to the state, which was funded, to be able to hire a consultant to look at the feasibility and location of the trail, potential trail, if possible, and how to open up this beautiful area for the public. So that's where we are today. We obviously had to have some meetings to get a starting point. It's not like we met behind closed doors and said, this is going to be it. We needed a starting point to be able to receive the public, some, intelligent public input on this plan. I'll let everybody up here introduce themselves, and afterwards, you can see me. I can give you my email. For input, there's a survey. Did we run out of surveys? We did. Wow, that's cool. So complete the survey, leave it on the table. Sign your name, don't sign your name, I don't care. But if at the end you want to talk to me or any of the consultants, we'll be around. You can take more looks at the board after the discussion. There'll be a short presentation and then Q&A. Yeah.
Thank you, Ken. My name is Gail Whitwer-Laird. I'm a landscape architect with Star White House Landscape Architects, and we're with Nicholas Griffithside and Kristen Bergen, also landscape architects. And we're working in partnership with Daniel Proper of Proper and O'Leary Engineering. Dan actually worked on the capping of the landfill, so we're very fortunate to have his institutional memory on what's exactly there and how we can best work with it going forth. We're very lucky in this process to have all of the research and documentation and feasibility studies that were done as part of the master plan with the Land Conservancy. There were exhaustive natural resource inventories. We have a survey of the area. We know where the landfill begins and ends. And we're not beginning from zero here. I mean, yes, a lot of time has passed, so it took 10 years to get here, but I think very quickly we can develop a realistic phase one, something that can actually be built. So the goal here is that from your input and this preliminary design, which is a piece of the larger master plan, we come up with a buildable connector in the next year that can go for additional grant funding for construction. So this is the exciting part of master planning, is when you actually implement a piece of it. So I think if you can dim the light over there, we'll take you through the presentation. Most of you know the place very well, and we're part of the process. So I won't go too much into the history, but I will recap it for those of you who may not have been part of that process. I think the most important thing from the master plan and what we were really struck by is how this Hudson North Bay is almost like a missing link in this network of open spaces along the Hudson River. The conservation area, over 700 acres of open space here. There's actually a DEC conservation area up here. You have Charles Williams Park here, the high school, the waterfront park. So you have this, you know, fairly well-developed open space network, but it's not connected. So just by developing this piece, you actually get access to much more. So I think the master plan really understood that, and our job is to find out, you know, what's a manageable first step. And so I will take you through our initial thinking on that, and then we really look forward to your feedback at the end of that. So we've come to the site several times in different weather conditions. It's really amazing how it changes each time you're there. So here we are from the edge to the existing wetland and the landfill. You can see the shape of the landfill, the conservation area. There's the high school and the fireman's land, and then North 2nd Street there. As you know, this was informally begun filling in 1940s and was ordered to be closed in 1996, and 1997 is when the capping was complete. So another 10-year project to cap the landfill. And then there's a 30-year monitoring period for landfills. They settle, they monitor the groundwater, the gas vents. It's a regulated piece of infrastructure. And when they first capped it, it wasn't anticipated that it would be a public park. And in the last couple of decades, all over the country, people have realized that landfills have become these kind of default open spaces, and how do you retrofit them to public use safely, especially when they were initially conceived as open spaces. So that's one of the challenges here. This is a page from the master plan showing how the North Bay site fits into its context here, and how important it is as a first step here. And this is an image of the trail network that's maintained and operated by the Land Conservancy. And this is a copy of the concept plan. So we're beginning with a lot of thought already. And our task here is to implement the first step to get you from here to here. As part of the master plan, the landscape was extensively documented in terms of vegetation, wildlife, birds, amphibians, and here we are today. So we have begun field investigation for the phase 1. We had a wetland consultant delineate the edge of the wetland. As Ken mentioned, getting approval from DEC is an enormous part of this, because they both regulate the wetlands and the landfill. So everything we do and everything we envision has to go through this regulatory framework before we can implement anything. So delineating the wetland is part of that, and we had an on-site meeting with DEC that also included the people who oversee solid waste management. So they have long-term jurisdiction over how the landfill is operated and how introducing a public path changes that. So we have to anticipate the long-term maintenance of it as a landfill in addition to its maintenance and long-term management as a public space. So it will always have this dual functionality. So from your after the input today, we will go back and develop the plans further. We'll also have to go back to DEC. It's an iterative process, and then we'll come back to you again in the early spring with a plan that's been vetted by both DEC and all of the stakeholders. We have an advisory group here with the planning department that consists of the town and county supervisors, the Land Conservancy, and the planning department. So we've worked very closely together to make sure everybody's needs and concerns are addressed as we advance the plan. We don't want to put something out that then someone says, well, I can't maintain that, I can't mow that. Jolene, where's Jolene? Jolene Grace from the Columbia County Solid Waste Department. This is she's right in the middle of all this, and will inherit the maintenance, the extra maintenance that will inevitably come with it becoming a public space. So it has to be manageable. It's a very large space. It's over 30 acres, just the landfill alone. The entire study area for the master plan was 125. So it's a large parcel of land. What we're doing is a little more localized. So we're looking at the area, kind of disturbed area right at the foot of North 2nd Street, and then a route along the landfill, both the base of the landfill and possibly across the cap. This slide is showing you this is the 100-year flood plain. So no matter what we do in here, it's definitely within the 100-year floodplain, and this is the tidal wetland boundary. And anything you do within 100 feet of that boundary is regulated by DEC. It's both a state wetland and a federally regulated wetland, so that's just part of the constraints that we're working with. So the opportunity is it connects an amazing network of open space resources. The views from up there are stunning. It really it's a very unique landscape, and I think a lot of it's used informally now, but to formally open it up, it will bring more people to experience it, and it will also guide how people use it. Right now it's used informally, and not, I think, DEC, when they were there, said, well, it's used informally, but how do you formalize it in a way that controls access without compromising the management of the landfill. It now also functions as a very high quality grassland habitat. This was documented extensively in the research for the master plan. Applied Ecological Services surveyed the different types of birds and vegetation. And in fact, this is common to many landfills across the United States. They've realized that they serve an important function for ground nesting birds because they're open, they're relatively undisturbed, and migratory birds find these nesting places as they go up and down the eastern flyway. So the constraints are the landfill, the steep slopes. There's certain places where, yeah, I think it's an over, you can tell me, the maximum slope in some of the places is...
It's 1-on-3 slope is enough. That you can have permanent landfill closure criteria.
Yeah, so that was maxed out. So that's not exactly a comfortable hiking surface. Because it's capped, you can't do anything that goes through the cap. And anything we do, we have to anticipate will settle over time. The landfill is still moving and decomposing underneath. The hydrology is extremely important on landfills. We want to limit the amount of water that goes in, so it's designed to take the water off. So we can't interrupt that flow of water off the landfill. And it's a large area to maintain, so we have to think about that. So these are some views. Here's a view of the landfill from the water. And there's one kayak launch point underneath the rail bridge there. There's an existing, so I'm going to kind of take us on a walk from North 2nd up to the top. There's an existing former garage, which I learned tonight from Don Moore, is where they used to store the bulldozers. And so we thought, as kind of a first step, maybe this could be retrofitted into a hub of some sort for volunteers or kayak storage. We could look at, we put in a new set of doors and a fresh coat of paint. You have some place to organize events or infrastructure that's needed as it takes form as a park. Here's the informal parking that happens there now, and there's a small stream that actually comes across through a culvert here. one of the things we noticed right away is that because of the Harney plant and the truck traffic on that road, it's actually fairly dangerous for a pedestrian to just walk along that. There's no shoulder, there's a guide rail, and so there's a few pinch points when you're going along. So if you were just walking from Hudson, you wouldn't, there's no real pedestrian space to get there. And when those trucks come in, they're not anticipating this influx of people. So by formalizing the parking area, we also had to think about how do you get from either walking from North 2nd Street or from your car without going into that pinch point in the road and not walking along the shoulder. So there's another view of that. So there's kind of a large open area that has suffered from a bit of dumping because it hasn't been maintained or formalized. And then here's the stream crossing right here. There's also a connection here to Charles Williams Park. It's not fully developed, but at some point I think that should be part of, again, this open space vision of connecting the resources that are adjacent to the landfill. There's the stream crossing, and then here we are walking along the toe of the slope. And as you very quickly go along there, you start to get these incredible views of the wetland and the Hudson River. And here's a view from near the high point of it. And the colors, right now the colors are spectacular with the fall colors. They've mowed it now. This is before it was mown. And then here's a diagram of those existing conditions. So here's the proposed parking area. There's the toe of the slope. Maybe Dan, you can talk a little bit about the construction of the landfill itself, and then we'll go into the concept design.
Okay. So the landfill itself was closed in '84 in terms of waste acceptance, and the county took on the closure of the landfill, which involved placing a cap over the waste. So basically all it is a big umbrella, so that water, rainwater, doesn't get down into the waste and then percolate into the groundwater. That was the intent of the closure. It's regulated by New York State DEC, which is under Part 360. So in '93, they started closure of the landfill, the county forces. And the first step is just shaping the waste. So right now the waste is all scattered throughout the spot. So you go around looking for it on the outside, and they shaped it into teardrops, so that it created slopes so that water hit it, it flowed off. That was the intent. The next step was to create a separation, and it was a little bit unique for this landfill, and they had a wetland adjacent to it. So they went and created what was called a leachate barrier. And it's basically just a mass of clay. They went through along a perimeter, and we dug down about 15 feet into the water mass and into the wetland area, and placed clay along that entire stretch. So I would say it's almost 2,000 feet of linear feet of clay that exists there right now. And the goal of that clay was to prevent the mass from rainwater that gets into the waste directly flowing into the wetlands, having some resistance there. The next step involved placing the cap on the landfill itself. The cap total is 5 feet. So there's a waste mass, and above that is 5 feet of capping material. It started with 12 inches of venting material. And in this case, the Hudson landfill is a little bit more unique, because Hudson's unique in many ways, because instead of tire chips. So a lot of times it's gravel for the venting layer. It was ground up tire chips that went down for the first 12 inches. And on top of that is the primary barrier, which is called the leachate. I'm sorry, the cap, or I always get it wrong. Let's say it's called the low permeability barrier layer. And that consisted of clay. The reason why they use clay, there's different products you can use. Some people use plastic. On other landfills, bigger landfills. This one they used clay because the clay was right next to the site. And then on top of that, you put another 2 foot of protective material, so you don't have any issues with the low permeability layer. And that also, it's unique to this landfill, consisted of clay. Again, because of this location. The clay came right from, if you go back by Charles Williams Field and you back by the cul-de-sac, there's a huge clay mine that was there. And that was used for bricks at its time, but now it's used also to help close the landfill. And on top of that goes a layer of 6 inches of topsoil material. So in total, big umbrella. The idea is to keep the rainwater from getting down into the mass, and it consists of 5 inches, and in this case, 3.5 inches, 3.5 feet of clay. Or 5 feet.
Those pipes go down.
The pipes, the purpose of the pipes are for venting the gas that develops under the mass. That goes down to the gas venting layer. And in this case, it goes down a little bit further, maybe about 10 feet in total.
I've heard it said there was a slope failure in the early days. And can you talk about the seeps?
So there's two topics there. Is the slope failure. The slope failure occurred in the southern section of the landfill, and it was due to the use of different types of materials at the time that the county was trying to try out. On the back end, we ran out of clay, so we tried to use some silting material, and it just didn't stick onto the surface. But that's all been stabilized since then.
Okay. The seeps?
So there is a case where the ground, and it was talked about in the master planning, where the water in the ground raises up to a certain level seasonally during rain events and during the wet part of the year, and you do have seeps that come out along the toe, but only in very localized conditions.
And that's from the landfill.
And that is from
That's something that we'll address in parallel to the planning process. Like I said, it's not just an open space. It will never be just an open space resource. It will always be a landfill. So those are things that have to be addressed hand in hand with formalizing public access. The thing that's interesting about this cap is it's much deeper than actually required. Most landfills have a 2-foot minimum cap. A 3.5 is well above that. So we're very fortunate that that decision was made, even though they didn't anticipate public access. We have a thicker cap than is standard. These dots represent the venting, the vents, and there's also a culvert here underneath the landfill. There's 2 mounds, and there's a stream here, and the stream goes through this culvert and out here. So the natural flow of water actually manages to go through the mounds. You'll notice that out there, you'll see this promontory, which is actually where the fresh water goes through. Here's where the trail in Charles Williams is. This is the wetland boundary, is essentially the toe of the slope here. This is the wetland boundary. And the flood boundary kind of comes in and across here too.
Where's the high school?
The high school is over here. I can go back to a slide. We have it on this board here too. So here's the high school here. So the property, the high school abuts both the conservation area and Hudson North Bay, and then also the Firemen's Association. So you have these kind of 2 big neighbors to this end, in addition to the conservation area. The high school now does use the conservation area, the trails in the conservation area, and I think were this formalized, they could have a nice loop from the high school to North Bay to the conservation area. I think that's one of the goals, is to connect existing trails so that they have a greater constituency. They're made as trails. Right now it's not, there are no formalized trails. So our first pass at this phase 1 of the larger picture for North Bay is to, I think one of the most important things is to create a trailhead parking area that cleans up that lower area, connects, we are proposing a trail that goes behind that for people who are walking, so they don't have to walk along the road. The Conservancy is working on some interpretive signage so people know where they are, a trail map, how, people want to know, is it a mile, is it 2, or, where does this lead me to? And we would do some planting and improvements to that landscape here. So once the parking lot was developed, we would do some bioswales and restoration along that edge. And then rather than lead people along here, which is not feasible, or up to the Harney parking lot, which is how it's used now, but you kind of miss half the experience. So the goal is to make the experience begin here, and we're looking at doing a small footbridge that crosses that stream and takes you directly to the toe of the slope. One loop of it will be a stabilized path so that it's accessible. That's a requirement with any public funding and public project, that we have an accessible route. And there's some nice, actually really beautiful views where you're right down in the wetland here. And then a trail that would lead you to the conservation area here. And what we want to do is put that on places where it's already, there's some natural shelves that were part of swales, and on the areas where you have the most gradual of the slopes along that. So we're following, up here there's actually a bit of a, kind of a natural, whether it's a deer path, people path, people have already found, you know, the most gradual slope here. And then because when you get to the top, the view is so spectacular, we wanted to do an informal seating area with either stone benches or other types of benches. We'll get your feedback on that, that kind of capture these different views from that point. I think there's a natural desire. I know in the master plan there was an upper path and a lower path, and I think there's just a natural desire to want to be at the top of that mound. And once you get up there, you're kind of like, you take it all in. So, so there's an overlook there, and then the trail continues. The good thing about this area is it's actually not on the cap itself. The cap ends here, and this connects back into the natural topography. So we can put footings for benches. We could consider a shade structure if that were within the grander scheme of things in the budget, but we don't have to worry about the compromising the clay cap. So I'll just go through. We're studying now where the high school trail is and where the trails that go into the conservation area are. So these are the existing trails, and here's where we're looking at connecting to those existing trails. At some point, there could be a connecting trail here, although because it's lower, it's within the floodplain, and the trail at the conservation area doesn't exist there yet. But I think long-term, it would be, I agree with the master plan, that having kind of the lower connection that also connects you to the former brickyards, and there's you know, interesting things to discover that are different than the experience that is up here. So I think in terms of user experience, you have two very unique trails. But if this is going to be the phase one of the project, we want something that inspires people to do the whole thing. And I think what's so inspiring about this is how you can really take in this entire landscape once you get to the top of this hill. And then you can continue on for several miles once you're in the conservation area, which is pretty interesting.
How far is that walking?
From here to here, it's about a mile. Yeah. So, yeah. It's not that long. Like I think it's like 0.9. I have a little thing where
I think it's half a mile.
half a mile.
It's the most.
Maybe it's a mile there and back.
Where are you
I think it's 0.9.
Just point out that
Yeah.
the lower trail is also ADA, intended to be ADA compliant.
Yes, so this will be ADA compliant. It would be impossible to make it ADA compliant, but the goal is to grade it so that it doesn't have any dips or rocks, or so that you could jog on it without worrying about twisting your ankle. And it would be a natural surface. So, so here's an image showing here's a leachate barrier that Dan mentioned that's at the bottom of the slope. So you could create the trail on top of that very easily. And we're looking at what are surfaces that are compacted but have a natural feel. I think you don't want something that feels too artificial in that context. But at the same time, it has to withstand flooding and be able to take any kind of, whether it's a stroller or a wheelchair or some other. And it's also used as a maintenance road for the landfill, and that has to stay. So we have to always keep that in mind. So the idea is that in places where the slope is like this, we fill it with earth and geotextile and then stabilize it. So you have kind of a soft green path within the larger landfill that takes you all the way across. And we've done it at 8 feet in width, which is the width of the mower that the county has, so that while the other areas of the landfill will only be mown once or twice a year, which is what they do it once a year now. And that's worked out with DEC. They don't mow it to preserve the bird habitat in the spring for the nesting birds, but the path itself would have more frequent mowing so that it stays open throughout the year, and also controls where you go. So you know that this is where it's graded, and it also keeps you from going into the meadow. Right now, people walk wherever it makes sense, and so here it guides people, which is part of what you want to do, is guiding how people use this space. So there's an example of the mow path, and here's a detail of the trailhead parking area. So we have a few benches, some signage, future connection to the park here, and here's where we would have the stream crossing. Here's about how long the bridge would be. I think Nicholas worked on the design of just looking at how we can connect across at the right elevation. 12 is the flood elevation, the 100-year flood elevation, so the bridge has to be above that. And it looks like you can connect pretty much from the toe of the slope to the trailhead parking area with about an 80-foot boardwalk / bridge, which is designed with and these are examples of what that might be. This is a suspension bridge. How long is this one?
212.
Yeah, so we're going 80 feet. So it's important to DEC when you're working with a stream corridor or a wetland to disturb it as little as possible. We met with them and they were supportive of making this stream crossing. So that's actually very positive, because sometimes they'll say don't go near a stream, and here they understood what we were trying to achieve and they supported some kind of crossing with a minimal foundation. So the parking is for about 34 cars and would pitch into a bioswale. So all of the runoff would go into a planted open area before it goes to the wetland. Example of a bioswale is basically a planted depression so that the water doesn't just sheet flow into the wetland. It goes into a natural filter. And DEC was also very supportive of that since the existing landscape is really pretty degraded.
Sorry, the parking was near that bulldozer garage or near that dumping area?
I'm kind of in between the two.
Okay. You'll get to it.
So we're looking at porous asphalt. In terms of the surface, we'll have to do a little bit of investigation of the subsoil to see how permeable that is, if that really makes sense, or if it's just a regular asphalt that pitches into the bioswale. We have to see what's feasible. And we also have to do a cost estimate. I didn't mention that before. Part of what we're doing now, because this is a plan to implement a phase 1 of the master plan, we'll do, after this meeting and your input, we'll do a preliminary cost estimate. We have to come up with a number that's fundable and buildable, and so all of the materials, the length of the path, those things go into this cost estimate. So we'll put some kind of barrier right along the parking to keep cars from driving in the wrong areas. We'll put some bike racks at the trailhead, and these are some preliminary images of types of site furnishings. Maybe the more traditional benches down by the parking area, and maybe the stone benches up at the top, or a combination of the two. And there's a zoomed in detail of the overlook. So we have a few benches. We have some surface around it so that it's easy to maintain and orient them towards the different views. Different times of year, the view changes. So we could have a cluster of benches at the top, and and maybe a couple of shade trees or possibly a shade structure at the top. And any plantings we do will be chosen to increase habitat. I think that's a very important aspect of the existing site, and will be in anything we do, especially down near the parking area where there isn't much of anything in terms of native vegetation along the edge. And here's a view to North Bay from the conservation area. Again, here's that deer path, if you will, at the top. And, I'll end with the plan, and I'll leave that up there, and we can start a Q&A, and we'll take notes. We look forward to understanding how. I'd like to know how it's used now. What are the what are the most important aspects of this plan that you'd like to see implemented? And this is your meeting.
Yeah, just one thing. I know he's here, but I can't find it. Peter Payton? There you are. If you would like to say a few words, CLC kind of started with the master plan. Would you like to say something?
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. This is an idea we've been urging for a number of years. We have this very wonderful conservation area just north of the city, and it isn't easy right now to get there from the city, and that seems like a bad idea. And this seems like a very logical and potentially beautiful connection, and even if someone doesn't choose to walk all the way to the conservation area, it's a beautiful area in and of itself. And I think, open space in Hudson is in short supply, and connections with the river in Hudson are not great yet. This hopefully will be the beginning of a whole reimagination of the waterfront, but I think this could be kind of a catalyst for that. And I'm just thrilled that we're finally here and so far along. I think it's a wonderful thing for the city and really for the whole community.
We'll take notes. We'll leave these boards behind, by the way, also with the planning department. So if people have thoughts after the meeting, definitely communicate that back to the planning department.
I have a couple questions. I want to know if the project is making sure to use as many local resources as possible, and paths and retention to cut down on waste and fuel, but also to put the money back in the area. And also I'm wondering if this is going to be put out to bid to all local businesses.
This part of the design is, this part of the project is just the design. When it does go out to bid, that's part of the procurement with state funding, actually. The state is very conscious of including local businesses in the process. In fact, the design part, we included the wetland delineator, the engineer. So yes, that is part of it. And I think the second part of what you were talking about is sustainable design. And I think that's something that, yes, is absolutely part of the goal here, is to use local materials, local resources. It makes sense economically, and it makes sense in the larger picture. So the procurement end of the project will come after the contract documents. And it depends on the funding source, but I think a project of this size will definitely need outside funding from the state. So, but it's a very desirable thing to fund. I think there are grant programs that when you have buildable documents and a consensus on the project, they're fairly fundable. So, and this has a lot of research has gone up to this point. So I think you have a very good chance of getting local funding and state funding.
Do you have a rough sense of time frame from getting where we are now to buildable documents to bid process, all that kind of? I mean, we're not talking another 10 years.
No. Actually, we're working fairly quickly. So this is the first public outreach for this piece of the plan. Once we get your input, we'll develop the details of the trail we'll develop the plan in greater detail. We also need to meet again with the DEC and actually the Army Corps of Engineers. It's a joint review. We need Jolene and the Columbia County Solid Waste Department to feel comfortable with what's being proposed. We need to ensure it fits in with the larger goals of the waterfront planning that's going on. And then we'll bring the plan back to you to have another meeting. And then the end product by the end of next spring, early summer, will be a set of contract documents. And permittable, the keyword is permittable contract documents. So we're going to produce plans you can build from and that can be permitted, that DEC will permit. So that is the goal. And the funding cycle for the state is in the summer. So if you have this set of plans and a cost estimate in late spring, early summer, then you can go for the funding cycle for the next year. So we're 9 months from 100% contract documents. And once you get the funding, and usually procurement takes several months, so that part I can't put a precise time frame on, but it's within the next couple of years if you can get the funding in place.
When you say spring, the next will be 2018 or 19?
18. Yeah. No, the goal is to get a buildable plan by early next summer.
Public health and safety are my concerns, and so is the integrity of the ecosystem, and especially birds. You have 2 bird species that are, the wetlands is an important bird area under National Audubon. I don't know if you know that. And it doesn't seem like you're not proposing any kayak launches or anything, so I'm less concerned about the wetlands birds than I am the bobolinks that are, especially on the South Mound. They occasionally breed on the North Mound, but they always breed in the South Mound. It's been this saga for years. It was mowed at the wrong time. We worked with the county. We got it all worked out now, and the bobolinks are back in the South Mound. So I'm a little concerned about the placement of that one trail that goes up. And because you want it to be ADA compliant, maybe it's better if it's down the slope a little, because they're on the west side of the mound, just off the top. So the further you can stay away from the bobolinks, and they do double clutches, so it's a productive meadow, better for the birds. But public health and safety, I spoke to you earlier about potential crime here and adding to the city's crime problems, and even fostering the city's crime problems, which is a concern. So I'm glad there's no tower. Originally, the master concept plan had no tower there. Then a tower got added in. I was very critical. Some people talked about it. I talked to the police about it. It looks like now you've got seats there, which is great. Cuts down on the ability to see over the Phragmites. But as you know, the Phragmites are like a wall there. It's huge. So you're walking down this tunnel between a Phragmites wall. You're never going to extirpate that. And a really steep slope. Is it 1 and 3? So you're walking down a tunnel. That might get scary. And I think less is more is good. And I think you're doing less is more in the first phase, and I really like that. Third is public health. Crawford Engineering is supposed to do an annual, they've gas testing and water testing. You got several water testing laws out there. We can't find out, and we've never had anybody in the city who's been able to help us find out if they're doing that annual testing. So they got the contract, they did the phase 1, they're committed to annual testing, and we can't find out without the help of the city if they're doing it. It'd be great to know. It'd be great if and somebody can help us. But we have new administration coming in, and we might find that out soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, there's so many.
Can I talk to you about the bobolinks later?
Yeah, we can talk about the bobolinks later. I do want to talk about the bobolinks, actually. We also, our firm is also working on Fresh Kills Park in New York City, and I spoke to the administrator of Fresh Kills Park, where they also have nesting bobolinks, and I was concerned about the relationship of a path to the unknown meadow, and in fact, in the east portion of Fresh Kills, there are bobolinks, and they have gravel maintenance paths, and as long as the path doesn't move, the bobolinks know that, where their meadow is, and they use these paths for landfill inspection, and the bobolinks still nest. So I'm not concerned about the path so much, as long as it doesn't move. With the bobolinks, it's all about timing of mowing. And I think that's something we work with DEC and the county to come up with what's that window, what's the biggest window we can not mow to keep the
I don't want to
nesting.
force that window, and it took years, so I know.
Yeah, well, it's something, it's part of the thinking that went into the master plan, and it will be part of what we do for the project. We will also be doing some maintenance guidelines, and those maintenance guidelines will lay out how often and what those windows of mowing should be. But we're also, working with what the constraints of the regulated landfill are, and that has to be acknowledged no matter what, that we can't allow woody plants to creep up on the landfill. So it's a fine line between the two.
I'm wondering if the specific route for the Empire State Trail has been laid out. I don't know if it has yet, but to what extent that ties in to this?
We have looked at that a little bit. The Empire State Trail is a bicycle trail, and that will go, I think, along Dock Street, and it goes, there'll be a hub, I think, at the foot of Warren Street, near where the Promenade Park is. I think I would see these as parallel trails. That's really a biking trail, whereas I think this is a nature trail. This is something for jogging, hiking. This is connecting you to a conservation area. So I think here we want to encourage foot use, not bicycle use, because you're going into a conservation area with steep slopes. You don't want erosion. So I think they're two completely different types of trails, but they're parallel. And maybe the trailhead parking could be used by both. Maybe you drive in and you park your car and you get on the greenway from here. On the bicycle, it's not so far. So I think by improving that initial area as a bit of a hub, if you will, is really important for a lot of things that are happening here, because you'll have, an open, clear, visibly maintained area that signifies that this is a public place, and it's a place where you can park your car and go to the water's edge where the kayak launch is. You can walk to the conservation area. So I think it's an important, like Peter said, this is a catalyst for other things, and I think the more it's used, the safer it is. So the more legitimate use, the more people who use it in the way that it's intended to be used, then the less other kinds of uses you have. So the more it's used, the better.
There are ways to plan those. So, for instance, I wanted to ask if you can use stone benches down below, or is that prohibited by the needs of the land? Because anything wood will be marked up and dug into and graffitiized. And stone, anyway, you can stand on it. And
Right,
just
it
get a
doesn't
view.
burn either.
I mean, those are the kinds of things we want to hear about. We want to hear about whether you like it or not. Should it be connected to the Empire Trail? Should it be stone benches, not wood benches? Tower, no tower?
Well, if you go to Ramshorn, you can see a tower that's all carved up, and that's hard to get to.
Sure.
And
sure,
they're
sure.
really good at maintaining the tower, replacing those portions. Why
Sure.
not stone benches below? Is there anything prohibiting that?
No.
Okay.
No.
But those are the things we want to hear. We want to hear your ideas. We want to hear about.
How are you expecting people to get there? Like, when I drive in, where am I driving from?
North 2nd Street.
North 2nd. From where?
From Hudson, or if you're coming from Greenport, I think once it's known on the map, you'll be guided to. It has a
You're
name.
not thinking about going down the front?
No.
The only way to get back there is on the extension.
Yeah.
North Second Street.
This is North 2nd here. You really,
So you can drive all the way around?
You can go from Dock Street.
Yeah. You can go all over.
But the only way to get to the parking area, I guess, is on the North Second.
Yeah.
So certainly you have to go back to North Second Street.
yeah. So this is North 2nd. Dock is over here. I think this is the,
Well, you go past where they you know, the sewer treatment plant.
Yeah, that's over here.
Go around there. That was my point, is that where are you connecting, how are you connecting people to arrive there?
Need more foot traffic, is your concern.
Well, I'm talking about my car, I'm driving somewhere, I'm parking, where am I driving from in your mind? Or am I going
Yeah,
to
it
Warren
feels like
Street?
you're going to the edge of town.
Right.
Am I going from the train station, from the
Right.
waterfront, you know,
Right.
just,
Right.
this is a chunk, so I'm trying to imagine like how you think of it.
Right. I think, you know, much like there are signs for other destinations, there's a sign for Orlana or the Fireman's Museum, that should be incorporated into the language of the city signage. The North Bay Recreation Area, you could have this sign at the top, you know, there's kind of the top of the hill at State and North 2nd, and there should be some signage. So, and maybe that signage is in other parts of the town, just like.
I mean, in my mind, if you're talking about the waterfront connects it better than going across North 2nd, just as I think.
Right.
And the other issue is there's a place from Harry Howard to go into that. I don't know if you've thought about that.
Dugway.
Where is that on?
There's a place from Harry Howard that connects to
Mill Street?
Mill Street Extension.
Over here.
On one of your earlier
No,
slides,
Mill.
it's a little bit
It
zoomed
comes
out,
down
you can
to,
see the whole thing.
Charles Williamsfield, right? Is that where it comes
Yeah.
from?
Right down by them.
Right here.
Yeah.
goes to the, goes to the
No,
far.
no,
It's off
It's off the map.
Yeah,
It's parallel with the park.
But I think that's worth saying since the Empire State Trail was brought
Right,
up.
right.
The current route of the Empire State Trail, and some of the different sections of it are in debate, but it seems like the section that we're talking about here isn't. That will come down from Harry Howard, it will go down the Dugway, it'll go past Charles Williams Park, and then over to Dock Street, right there, and head over towards front. So it actually will be directly adjacent to this, and then it'll go up front and towards the waterfront, like you're saying, Linda. So, and that, I think this portion, that portion is bike, walk, run. So it will be a
Right,
nice
right.
path, and that will be something that will lead you from either the waterfront on the other side of town, Front Street and Warren Street, and everything
So you're
down,
coming at it from
past the
multiple
community
angles.
garden and everything Kite's Nest is doing down there, Burgery, and around in a natural and kind of nice way over to this.
And Dugway is just bike path right now, correct? There's no.
It's a paved former road that's now a bike path, yeah, it's closed to vehicles.
Yeah. You know what we can do? We can get the plans, whatever the preliminary plan is for the Empire State Greenway, and we'll kind of zoom out a little bit and put the two plans together and look at where, you know, where those intersections are and how we can signal people to one trail or the other. I think that's a bit of a planning exercise, but I think it's a valid one, especially since the Empire Trail is definitely coming, and I know this is a hub along that trail. It's an important piece of that trail. So I think maybe we can take this zoomed out map and just layer that in to see how the two trails intersect.
So maybe I missed something, but just to be clear, in this phase, there's no physical connection to the Greenport Trail.
Yes, there would be a physical connection up here.
Okay. And that's in this part of it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We want to make sure we get from
Okay.
the bottom of the hill to the Greenport
All
area.
the way,
Yeah.
okay.
Just one last comment, it just seems like this is to simply move through and not linger. Except when you get through.
Well, actually, we're proposing two
Beside your little
routes here and here.
Because it doesn't, you don't loop on that. You either going through or going back to your car.
Right,
And you don't, there's no way
Right.
to loop.
doesn't connect and loop.
Yeah.
It's a cul-de-sac, isn't it? The shore one?
Yes, it is. One of the things that in looking at the existing condition, this side of the landfill are very steep slopes, so coming across here is really not feasible. I think ultimately in the phase 2, the ideal loop is to be able to go through the conservation area and back around here. So I think, again, zooming out a little bit, I think that's the goal, is that you could have this, there's what's called the yellow trail through here that could ultimately connect you down here. So.
I think it's really exciting. You put a lot of fears to rest. I mean, a lot of us talked about this a lot and never came up with this particular scenario. And that's excellent, but Jolene can talk a little bit about occasionally there's an ATV problem up there, and I don't know what kind of barriers you can put up to make sure they don't get on there.
Yeah, I think that is a real concern. I think the barrier rail has been installed
Yes.
along,
Yeah,
along the
the
existing
perimeter of the
road.
landfill.
And one of the things that we like about the bridge, it's a pedestrian bridge, that the main access will be a narrow pedestrian bridge, and the gate that's a maintenance gate will be kept closed. So it will be designed as soon as the trailhead area is designed for pedestrians only. We talked about bollards, no bollards. I think there's, the maintenance of the parking area and roads are an issue, but the trail itself will not be, you won't be able to, it won't be wide enough to get your ATV in, and if the gate's closed, you shouldn't be able to go in.
Is that a problem in the Greenport area, ATVs?
No.
No, I got a couple observations on that side of things. I live right on the old Daisy Hill Road into the Land Conservancy, and where the parking lot got moved up top. And so I did have a couple concerns I wanted to offer, as I used to live there when the parking lot was off the street and when the parking lot is on the street. And I'm definitely not a big pro law enforcement person, just to put it out there, so you know I'm not coming from like. So when the parking lot was off the road, there was lots of drug deals, lots of affairs, and lots of people trading their laundry. So definitely a place that's not near the road invites a criminal element. And it's not that I'm being mistrustful of people, or especially of young people, but a place that has that kind of, unfortunately, freedom often offers a lot of criminal behavior. So I just wanted to put that out there as an observation that I've had where I live. But not at all trying to put a dampening on this, and I'm so appreciative of all the work that's gone on this already. In that also, though, is I'm so appreciative of the Land Conservancy. I like all their sites through the county and the work they put into it. And one of the things that's really impressed me is that I think they've really worked with other people to protect the local flavor, meaning that not only using local resources, but not overbuilding something, over-sterilizing something, which makes a lot of public places just kind of disgusting, because they're kind of taking away the natural element. And so, like, I was hoping that instead of like a porous gravel parking lot, you'd use the pea stone and the local screenings. And, like, but thinking that way, not like, let's do an asphalt porous, like, that sounds like McDonald's, no offense. Like, let's do the local natural drainage format for a nice parking lot, like a parking lot would be done anywhere else. Like, that's also not using asphalt's very, it burns so much material and is a hazardous product. So that's a couple observations I just had. Definitely the safety one, that's a real concern. Also because the yellow trail, all the way there, one thing it also does is it does allow access all the way into the whole Land Conservancy. And so before, it always has an access point that's closed, so someone can't just come in. And so now it is going to open a whole lane in that's not watched. And once again, I'm not interested in cameras or any funny stuff, but I'm just pointing that out. Like this year we had some people, times are getting harder and harder, so we had people sleeping in the park this year. And it was okay, everyone talked to people, we worked it out, but I'm just pointing it out so we understand and think about it a little bit, like how can we make this safe and also not encourage this kind of behavior there, because people are going to ride on the benches, and they're going to, so how can we do it thoughtfully that just doesn't encourage this?
The entrance from, in fact, the high school has already been destroyed.
That's what I mean. That's actually the most, when Nick brought it up to me, that's the one I'm most worried about. And I know we're all growing and we make our mistakes, but that one looks like the biggest disaster point. We're talking drug deal centrally, like that's just going to inspire terrible behavior. So.
No, I really appreciate your comments. No, those are really, really important comments. We were conscious of making sure that the parking area is close to the road. There won't be any low vegetation. I think it's important to have sight lines. Those are, so anyone driving by or, law enforcement, good people, can see in and out. I think the more visible it is, the better it is. There is a fair amount of traffic along this road already, just because of the Harney plant and the sauerkraut factory. So I think it's a pretty visible location. So I think the more it's used, the safer it will be. So we are conscious of not tucking it in too far and making sure that there's clear sight lines.
But there's going to be no way to limit access or make it obvious if someone is going through after a certain point at night or anything like that? I mean, I don't see how they could do that.
Yeah, I mean, this is
big parking lot.
Long-term management. I think we talked in the beginning, just as a small group, do you gate it, do you not gate it? But then if you gate it, someone has to open the gate, then the gate gets broken. So we felt it was better to keep it open, but also visually very open, so that
I hope these plans go by the HPD. Hudson Police, they should really be, they're the ones.
I live on Mill Street, and I just want to thank Peter for inviting me here because I am down there. And there are times, because it is a secluded area, where, the people on Mill Street do have to be the police. So I guess one of my concerns, before you even said that, I was thinking was, what about the lighting? Is this going to be closed when it's dark? Or is there going to be lights where that we will have people come down at nighttime? Because now I'm thinking about the safety of my family and my neighbors and my children, and it kind of changes the dynamics. I think this is an excellent idea. I like it. I think when you said less is more, it's better. I'm in agreement with that because I'm there. And I guess part of my concerns would be the phase 2 or the phase 3. What else is coming down that's going to be like surrounded with me in my backyard and my kids and my neighbors? And so, I can talk about that another time. But as far as this goes, my main concern is, what about the lighting, and is it going to be something that people can have access to when it's dark?
That's a really good comment, and I think we'll talk about that also with the planning department and the solid waste department about whether lighting should be included in the scope or not. There are fairly affordable and functional solar lights now. Maybe that's something we could look at. There's already poles there. Maybe some lighting there is required. I think we need to look at what the infrastructure is and what's desired from a maintenance and operations standpoint.
Are there street lights there?
Yeah.
There's one street light at the end of the street, and the pavilion has solar. There's a pavilion down there, and there's solar lights that go under to the path to the pavilion. There's a spotlight on the pavilion.
Do you prefer to have more lights?
I was gonna say, is
right. Sometimes more light is like
less light, more safe because you can't hang out there.
Right. But when we didn't have, when I first moved down there was no lights. But then there wasn't the pavilion. When the pavilion came and we didn't have lights, we did have kids that came and just hung out in the dark, which was kind of creepy because I didn't know who it was.
Right.
We don't have a lot of traffic, so it's like every now and then on a nice day, you get a bunch of kids that may come down, but for the most part, it's quiet, and a lot of people just don't know about it, in which, of course, that has its benefits.
Right. Well, I think we really appreciate these insights from you, and I think we'll discuss it amongst the planning group and look into what's there now. We'll kind of document where the lights are and how much light is there, and see if maybe adding a little bit more light is feasible in this part of it. I think it is really important that it be successful as a phase 1, and maybe being able to see in night and day is a good thing. So we'll look into it, definitely.
I'm curious about, basically where this area begins is almost exactly where the DRI zone ends.
Mm-hmm.
And
so that's right here.
Yep. And, I've heard a lot of mention of how to get cars in there to park and walk around, but what's most exciting to me about this is that you can walk from the city without a car, that people who don't have cars aren't old enough to have a car or just don't own them, can access this nature space. And if there's ways for you in this phase to work with people and projects that are happening with the DRI to create more of a cohesive vision and partnership for sidewalks, lighting, access points, because it's not safe to walk down 2nd Street. It's very dark, and is there even a sidewalk for that steep part?
No, there isn't.
And then there's no sidewalk around Dock Street or down front. That whole area is not safe for pedestrians, for children, for anybody really, but a lot of people do walk their dogs and stuff in that area, and children ride their bikes down, they go down the 2nd Street hill and back around up front, or the other way around. It's like a loop. And so I would encourage the vision at this point to try to connect more with the other efforts that are happening in the north end of town, and leverage the potential for other funding to help make this connection more relevant to the community. Because I do think that some of these safety issues that are coming up, though totally legitimate concerns, I think one of the best ways to counteract those risks of the place being abused is for people to feel a sense of ownership and belonging, that this place is for them, not just for the tourists who drive in with their like fancy hiking gear and whatever, and that like this belongs to the people of Hudson. And then, for educators like me and my organization, like we could support by encouraging kids to feel like this is a place that's special and sacred and that we take care of, and we help maintain the trails. But it has to start with feeling like there's signifiers in the plan that this is actually meant for the community here, and not yet another thing to draw tourists from outside of Hudson to come drive their cars into Hudson, go for a walk, and then go to a fancy restaurant. So I just want to encourage that to be part of the thinking at this point, and offer my partnership in like thinking about how that could happen, especially
What's your organization?
Dock Street, Kite's Nest. And so, right, we own that property, the community garden and the whole property over on the corner of Dock in front.
No, I think that the pedestrian access is really important. Maybe with that same kind of just zoom out look at the adjacent streets and the right of way. We did make sure that there's enough space within the right of way, so if the future sidewalk were built, there's space for it. And I think if this trail could be improved here, this is an important connection through the park here. And once you get to this point, we made a pedestrian trail across the back. So once you get to this kind of very narrow pinch point, this is a pedestrian connection. But I think, showing where there's sidewalks and where there aren't sidewalks is an important thing to leverage that infrastructure to make those sidewalks. So, here's where they end, and here's where they're missing.
That would have to get into the plan in the next month. So, as far as the DRI is concerned. So it's just something to consider, this is our moment to advocate for, because currently there's no plan for sidewalk infrastructure in the North Bay, but there's a lot of plans for it in the South. Mm-hmm. So you could be at the forefront of, trying to get that in that proposal. So
we can show, the limit of the North Bay is, I think it's right here. So we could show, what that length is, and the space is certainly there. So I think we can at least include that in the study, in this kind of zoomed out study, and then when we get to the costing part of it, we can say, okay, what would it take to put a sidewalk from that intersection to this one?
Gail, it's a very valuable comment, and it reminds me, and I have not brought this up before in these discussions, there is working its way through the system as a DOT loop grant. That comes down Dugway, Mill Street, goes up 2nd and around to John L. City got this grant, it must have been 4 years ago. And the way the Department of Transportation moves, it's very slow. But it has to be only a couple of years away at this point. And that could be a major connector here. And as I haven't thought about it before, but I appreciate Kai's bringing that point up, because that is something that we could definitely look into here.
Is that safe routes to schools?
Safe Routes to Schools, I believe, is the one that goes up to this high school. It may be, that Safe Routes to Schools may be that grant, and then there's another grant that comes up Harry Howard, and that paves this pavement basically from Dugway, Lucille Drive, up to the high school, on the west side of Harry Howard.
So I think that's a really good comment. So we'll zoom out a little bit and make sure that the plan kind of captures, from the edge of where North Bay is and at least shows this is where it's missing, this is how long it is, and you can take that as a separate, almost like a separate chunk. Like this is a piece of missing infrastructure, and we'll definitely highlight at least as a diagram that can be used.
A couple of things, a couple more things I have is definitely the CLC is not just for rich people, but all sorts of local people I know go there all the time to have a safe place to walk and access the trails. So that's definitely not the case. The other thing CLC does that's really amazing is they allow people to hunt. And hunting, since the area has been bought by many people, finer means has excluded most hunters from a place to hunt. And so most people think of hunting as maybe, oh, these people shooting stuff, or I don't like these guys, but really these are people that often are doing something that's also a remnant function of human life, which is hunting. And it's so valuable that this organization allows a place for people to hunt. That we're losing, hunters are losing space every year. Most of them have nowhere to go. Many are flight poor and rely on the meat and the time to go do it, and even the space to hunt. And so right now, as it is at the CLC, I'm a hunt monitor, which I've been so pleased I was allowed to be, because it's given me somewhere to hunt, because I also had nowhere to hunt if I didn't live there. Before, I had plenty of friends that were farmers, but they all don't have their land anymore. So it's something that's really nice that happens there, and it's also something that, I guess from some conversation with some different friends and acquaintances, I felt like I wanted to be able to say something too that was like, I know that we want and need public access, and we need the right to people to be in nature. And then also I thought, hey, also we need space for nature. And so think about the trails and where they go, and the amount of open space too. And also like remember the people that are hunting there. Because that's also really important, and that space provides people with that part, which is crucial. And then, but in that, when people don't follow the rules that are established, for instance, someone might only have, like a person who gets a permit, they have to go through a whole process to hunt there, okay? They get 2 days. So let's say it's someone who really doesn't have a big income, and they really rely on that. And they're out hunting, and someone decides, I don't care, I'm going to run the yellow trail. Well, what that does is, it probably ruins the hunt for that person, and they might not get that deer. And they have 2 days to do it. So like there's some ways, can we find a way to also like, in the kindest way, knowing that it's really, it's a public place and it's a place for, to move back and forth and for nature, that also it's really, I think, honorable that that space is also not just exclusively pedestrian, but allows for people to hunt and be part of nature in that way also, which is quite profound.
It's almost like the bottleneck. Hunting is a seasonal thing. So you put signage. I know the CLC. There's signage there now. When we hiked this afternoon, I wore a yellow vest, and
just in case anyone's wondering.
But it goes to kind of the long-term management and education about how the site is used. So it's seasonal.
It's quite controlled. We limit the areas of the property where people can do it. It's bow and arrow and black powder. There's no rifles used. We have historically closed off the yellow trail for hunting, and we've very preliminarily discussed the fact that this all gets constructed, we'll probably have to direct hunting to take place in some other areas. We don't have hunting going on in a place where there are active trails, so we're pretty careful about that. And the hunting is limited. It's limited. In this case, there's just a few people who are monitors at the property. It's not open to the public.
The yellow trail side.
Yeah.
What about the duck hunters? Are they duck hunting?
There is.
It's a gunshots today, I don't know what you're testing there, whatever. It's definitely something.
Blinds again, you see the blinds down there sometimes.
There are type blinds out there. I concur and I support this, the speaker's concern. Maybe, Mr. Payton, you need tick outbreak signs, you know? Just for the couple days. Just for the bubbling to breathe. Infestation warning.
Going off of what Kaya said, I am interested whether this is designed for the city or people visiting, and I think if it's designed to engage we have a large population, then I'm not convinced that how to get there is solved. And going up and down Second Street is hard.
Yeah.
So it either needs steps or it needs something that encourages people on foot, not drive in, park my car, blah, blah, blah. If that is the energy behind this, then you're a little off in your idea.
So it's the edge, how you're...
Well, it looks great, but I'm not convinced that the pedestrian is really at stake here, because we're worried about parking lots, cars, and but the reality is it's the foot. And how do the feet get there, and where are you linking it? And if you're linking it on Second, that's a tough.
So what's the invitation from
Right.
the city?
No, I think this is really valid, so I think we need to kind of zoom in.
By foot, or how are you going to access this if I live in Bliss Towers? I live on Bliss Towers, it's on Second. How do I get there? How am I encouraged to get to this, to take a walk? Many people don't have. The same problem with Charles Williams Park. People don't use it because it's hard to get to. Right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that, the street grid is a street grid. People will either walk down the hill or they'll walk around if they don't want to walk on something straight up. I don't know what could be done to change that. I don't
You're creating
understand.
a parking lot that's very important to your park. I mean, the issue is you're creating a parking lot that's very important to this.
And should that be in a different place? I mean,
That's not my point. My point was that to get to this seems to be less important.
Well, that's the city's problem, and you just need lights, that's the city's problem, you need lights for one to make it just safer.
And as I said, guys, when this DOT-funded project is finished, there will be a sidewalk down Second Street.
I see.
And that's part of the loop that goes around to State Street, up State Street, toward Harry Howard, and around to Dugway, and then down. That's the purpose of the grant, is to provide a walking space around to the schools.
I mean, a couple of things, and I'm glad Kitesness is here, because one of the reasons, on a personal note, I was interested in this is that everybody used to say, well, kids don't know where the milk comes from anymore, and I'm like, well, I think they do, but maybe they don't know where their garbage used to go, or, you know, and I always looked at it as educational for children. I really did, and I've always said that to Peter from day one. Second is that, yes, parking lots sometimes can attract crime. But, so let's look at things like no parking lot. And then we get the Supervisor-elect Mussman's, comments about how do you get there? We have a project maybe that's going to improve sidewalks in that area. And we have the Empire Trail that may get close to it. So these things are not unreasonable to say, okay, no parking lot, or just handicap parking lot, 1-2 cars for a handicap. And to encourage, again, the younger generation to get out and actually walk to somewhere. So those things.
But then people would lose parking up the street. You take someone else's parking.
Right.
Make a parking lot, you take someone else's parking.
But if we're going to have the Empire Trail, they're going to maybe have some designated parking, and maybe we direct everybody to there. I don't know. These are all great things that we're talking about, and this is really good. I don't know. Lighting, no lighting. Some lighting. I don't know. I really don't know. You hear people, if you put a lot of lighting, the criminals won't come. If you put no lighting, the criminals won't come. So, seriously, and these are things from your experience of being in that area that we want to hear about.
I was wondering about the status of the road at the very north end of the high school's property. That road that runs east and west, calling it a road might be a stretch. It's a bit of an undeveloped road or a trail. Is that an access point that you're planning on using? Do you know the spot I'm talking about?
You're talking about Jocelyn Boulevard,
Yeah,
right at the start of
as you go up Jocelyn, you go past the high school, and just at the end of the high school's property are a couple of ball fields.
I think that's the access point to the conservation area.
Right.
Yeah.
So are we still on the high school property at that point when you're going down? So what I'm wondering is there the possibility that for parking there and an access point off of that spot? It's a great walk. It's about half a mile, and you end up right down at the top of the landfill where the goosenecks are. And it's a really attractive walk, and what I don't know is whether there's issues with the high school and parking and all that. That would have to be sorted out. But I've done that walk many times, and it would be another really nice access point to this trail complex you're talking about.
I think for this project, our limits are within the boundaries of the county and the city land. And so, but the access to the conservation area is definitely part of the larger, the larger vision for access to both the conservation area and the landfill. So I think this project, we're limited to the study area that is within the master plan. Because that's dictated by the grant, but that doesn't mean it can't be part of a larger look.
I think that's the road I'm talking about, or the trail, is still within the city of Hudson, isn't it? Effectively the northern boundary of the city.
I think that's right. And then I'm pretty sure the school owns it.
It's the school owns it.
The school district.
Right.
And they definitely need to become part of the discussion at some point.
Because it would be a beautiful access point to this whole system.
So maybe this is minimized. Maybe we look at making the footprint of this minimized, look very hard about where those, kind of focusing a little bit more on pedestrian connections, and maybe you have two small access points rather than one large one. I think that's a good point.
And it makes it much more accessible because Jocelyn Boulevard is a major corridor that attaches to Greenport and everything else. So.
One area we did talk about this, and it needs to be a conversation with the schools, because it seems to me that and I've walked the same path many times here, and you get down to within about 150 feet of the top of the landfill, and their developed area, the wide area, disappears, and you have this rutted trail. Yep. And it seems to me that if the schools would see the value of this as a way, for example, for cross-country runners from the school to make a loop down that road and into the landfill and then up around 2nd Street or Dugway back to the school, it becomes a natural area for them to utilize, and gives them a reason to do a little bit more development on that trail down at the end toward the landfill.
What happens is you come down this trail, and all of a sudden you hit the open portion where the landfill is, and boom, there's the Catskills and this big vista. It's a pretty wonderful and dramatic entry. So if that were a feasible entry point to all this.
I think a portion of that trail is owned by CLC though, right where it meets the field. I think.
That's kind of the three school, the conservation area, and the all meet in that corner.
And that's where it's most rutted.
I don't think we own that.
No, they don't own that.
Don's idea is quite good. Right now, the cross-country runners run up and go down through the path in the parking lot and go down through the trail system, off Jocelyn. A lot of the high school kids when they're running. So it would be nice if they had a different route to go in that wasn't on the road.
They used to run on the landfill. That was a
Okay.
I think we'd like, is there anyone from the high school here? Maybe something we can reach out directly to the high school and take, the larger plan and the detailed plan and get their input on how they use it now and how they'd like to use it.
We should do that.
And I think, absolutely they are a really important constituent here. And I think having a cross-country loop across would be amazing.
I don't think there needs to be that much development.
for cross-country runners. I pretty frequently like run from my house and run through the North Bay and run to the conservation area. And I'm sure like someone with younger ankles will be fine with the trails as is. I mean, it seems like the development that, like, you don't need to do anything for someone to go there and enjoy it now. I think that it's more about accessibility and like making it more inviting. So I think like that's why it makes sense to build a parking lot, because a lot of people aren't going to want to just like, you know, get there on foot. And I also think it makes sense to, you know, to make some official trails and to make some signage, because it just makes it more inviting, although you actually, for the experience of it, you actually don't need those things. It's just that most people just don't feel welcome to like go wander around the woods. So in that sense, I don't know if it needs like a 30-car parking lot, but it does seem like you're going to want a parking lot because there's a lot of people who just won't walk more than a couple of blocks. So given that, unless they might get there and walk a mile, like once they're there, but they're not going to like walk a mile like around Hudson. So there are people like that who just won't walk. So it makes sense to have a parking lot if we want people to go there. At the same time, I think because it's kind of out of the way and it's not a destination, I think a lot of people won't drive there as well. In the same way that the waterfront park is beautiful, but I think a lot of people don't go there because it's like not part of their normal route. And I think no matter how great the parking lot is and the rest of it, there will be a lot of people who either won't drive there or won't walk there because it's out of the way. And so I think that does get to this sort of the next layer of conversation to be, well, you can build that parking lot and more people will start going there once you're doing that. But if it's just sort of like a pocket in and of itself, there'll be a barrier that other people won't ever make it there if that's where like the thinking stops.
No, this is really great input. I'm feeling the parking lot shrinking. And the pedestrian paths getting bigger.
Question about infrastructure, but I'm going to get to it again through crime. That cul-de-sac, hey,
no, it's
crime.
fine, it's fine.
That cul-de-sac, do not laugh at me. Don't laugh at me.
That's long
I was laughing with you.
I don't think so, yes. Oh, the cul-de-sac is the shore path, and it doesn't really go anywhere. So if you don't make that a destination, that's great. If you don't make things people can sit on other than a big stone bench, that's great. But I noticed boardwalks in the plan, and I have a lot of experience with boardwalks. People don't tend to wreck boardwalks unless there's a rail and seating. Now, the ice wrecks boardwalks, though. So every year, Swire Preserve up in Stuyvesant, they have to rebuild the whole thing. Great boardwalks. Ramshorn has less trouble, but it takes a lot of maintenance. What's that?
The tides.
Well, the tides, yeah. Boardwalk is not a bad idea. It's not a destination thing if you don't soup it up. But what's the plan for a boardwalk in terms of maintenance of the boardwalk?
I think the only place we're really looking at a boardwalk or bridge is just at the stream crossing.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There's a picture on the top left.
The overlooks here would be more informal. There'd be grading and benches.
Okay.
I think there is, I agree with this kind of minimalist approach here. What the plan is to reveal the landscape, not create yet another one. So I think it's having some seating and just grading it so that it's level and you have a good view. This one is low. Actually, you do feel between the Phragmites and the landfill, it is a bit of a box. And we were talking earlier with Dan about maybe we could raise the grade there so that it's just a little higher. Maybe it's just a little bit of earthwork. So that you would have a gradual transition up to a bit of a higher point at that location, and then grade back down. We have to still consider that it is the maintenance route, but maybe there's a way of elevating it so you don't have that boxed-in feeling, just enough to make it a nice seating area. But
Thank you.
A parking lot. Peter, how many parking spaces are right on Jocelyn right now? For the conservation area?
I think it's something like 14.
Okay. Impossible.
So whoever said a parking lot, I live right next to it.
That parking lot is so full, and it's hard for people to get in, get out.
It's not big enough.
It's not big enough.
I agree.
And so I'm not into covering space, but definitely that parking lot is not big enough. So 14.
So 14's too small,
Oh, yeah.
4's too big.
I'd say 34. I mean, like,
big.
No, I think it's too big,
You estimate how many people you think are gonna be there, I think, you know.
Yeah. But I think to Ken's point too, is that you want to encourage people coming by bike, by foot, and, you know.
But,
In our parking lot too, you can put a security camera. I know down at, for example, Anchorage, you have a webcam
Right.
there.
Well, I'm trying to pull right up to the Harney's lot.
You don't want them at Harney anymore.
Well, I think the idea is to, you get more for your experience if you start at the bottom and go through the, you know, to make this the more desirable. And it makes a closer connection to the downtown because you're starting closer to downtown rather than up the hill.
This may be opening up a can of worms, but when I think about how would I get to that access point you're talking about where you'll put the parking lot from here, right where we stand, there's a field below the John L. Edwards School, and there's an old path that goes into a floodplain. Maybe the floodplain's an issue because it does tend to get kind of swampy there, but you can just walk across it. You're on Mill Street. It's just, in my mind, it's like the city already had that laid out, but it's kind of fenced up now. And I'm not sure if it's school department land.
Yes.
So I don't know if that's untouchable, but it just seems like if you want to have more loops connecting to the Land Conservancy, connecting to the old landfill from the middle of town, 4th Street, that could be a great, especially since John L. is not going to be a school pretty soon, to have a path behind it could be a really nice way to access as well, as an alternative to going down 2nd Street.
How do you get down to that?
behind John L. Edwards.
Behind John L. Edwards, there is an old path, but there are trees that are down, so it's
It's
not...
pretty steep.
No, it's, that path isn't too bad. There is a path down 3rd Street that goes into Charles Williams that's really steep, but still there.
Yes, but if you want to dream, that's the place to have, there was a walkway there, down from 3rd Street into the old ball field.
Yeah, that's
It's a
steep.
perfect access point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You know, to build, you know, to rebuild down from it, so you come right off 3rd Street, down onto Mill Street.
That was,
And it's actually part of the master plan that was done originally, Carol published it, for the Charles Williams Park that got shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and became only, you know, a playground. But there was supposed to be access from the city down that way as well. And that plan still exists and it should be looked at.
One of the things we can do, as Gail said, some of this that you have mentioned is great information, but it's not within this grant. But let's not dismiss it. What we can do is take a quick look, identify it as something we need to research more, and move on from there. So, you know, this is not, it's not a matter of we're not going to take a look at it. But that, as you said, John L., is not going to be a school much longer, so maybe that is a good, or another access point.
And maybe
We have multiple access points.
It just seems like that would answer a lot of Linda's concerns and Kaya's too, if you have more than one access point. For one, you're not excluding people, and you're encouraging pedestrian traffic, which we really want. So, and we're actually making use of the landscape. We're not just going through the ruined industrial spot, but going through some beautiful, features of the landscape. I think that even doesn't get in the way of your all that layout, because that could be something worked out over time with the city to, hope, probably not, but that's just an idea to get it pushed in. Trash cans. I know they're a problem, but trash cans. Because we want everyone to be responsible and grow up and care about the environment, but people don't. And they don't, they should, but they don't. And maybe people are even getting worse. I don't sound like an old man. So, trash cans at the parking lot.
I agree with you.
Someone's got to do it, but
Seats carry in, carry out.
it's so much trash.
Huh?
Sorry, Peter.
Well, I hate to say it, but that's part of what people go there for, is to walk their dog. And
Oh, yeah.
that's part of
Carry in, carry out.
carry in. Your dog.
Throw further.
I think this is a very exciting project, and I just wish everyone a lot of luck. But I think hunting is very inappropriate at anything like this. It's just
unbearable for me. You listen to all this and how exciting it can be, and then you talk about hunting. It doesn't make sense.
There won't be hunting in any active pedestrian.
Pardon me?
There won't be hunting in any active pedestrian area. You know, we, as Chris said, we have very limited hunting at a number of our properties. Where it takes place is very specifically controlled. It is not, we don't have arrows flying around across pathways where people are walking.
Will it be in this area, Peter?
I don't know.
What
where
about
it'll be. We're
shooting?
No, this is county land, it will not be on.
Well, no, that's right.
It
Chris
doesn't
was
make
talking about
sense.
Greenport.
It doesn't
right.
make sense
Right.
to even
Don't worry.
remotely have that in an
We
area.
control where it happens, Mary, and the last thing we want to do is set up a dangerous situation between hunters and other people who use it. So we've been doing this for a long time. We've never had any problems. It's very limited, and if we have to change exactly how we manage Greenport in this regard because of this project, we will change it.
I hope so.
Thanks. Well, thank you. Is there any last?
Well, just quickly, I'm just incredibly excited about the whole thing. I use it a lot right now in its existing form, like Michael was saying. And I think a lot of us who do use it, from town into the conservation area and all the way up to Harrier Hill, this has kind of been the missing puzzle piece. And so it's really exciting to see what the potential is going to be as this gets developed. So I'm really excited about it. But I've just kind of, in this conversation, especially with Kaya talking about the connectors, and I know that she's trying to put together a project that may be a proposal for the North Bay area for the DRI. It really, I'm just thinking in this meeting that there may be an amazing opportunity right now, since the DRI is happening and as we're understanding what that process is, and a lot of the projects that we thought were going to happen aren't going to happen because they don't have matching funds, they don't have other things coming in. It actually seems like this may be something that might be a possible way that we can really get a good...
What's the DRI besides a punk band from the 90s and 80s?
It's the $10 million that Cuomo gave to us. It's $10 million that the state's giving us, but it has a lot of restrictions on it.
Okay.
And they really want projects that have other funding sources that have other things going. And I imagine the money that went towards this feasibility study could be considered matching funds that have already been.
That sounds like a great idea.
But it has to happen fast, and so it's just one of those things that I think we should try to jump on.
What's fast? In the next month?
Yeah, we should move in the next few months.
Can I have, let me, you know, I followed DRI and all that, but I'm still confused of who to talk to. If we're talking about moving fast, which I agree, you know, I'm not talking to the current mayor because that's going to change real quickly, January 1st. Who do you suggest I talk to?
Luckily, we have somebody on the committee right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
But a little conflict of interest. I need somebody a little more independent.
Well, she can bring it up, she just can't vote
No,
on
I
it.
understand that,
Bring
but
it up,
somebody...
but I can tell you who to talk to.
Okay.
That's not a conflict of interest.
Great.
If there was, I wouldn't be in this meeting.
I didn't
So
mean
the
that.
last local planning committee meeting for the DRI was Tuesday, and we were told any new project ideas should be sent to the two chairs, which are the current mayor and Matthew Nelson, and they will have it shared with the local planning committee. So that's the way to submit
Okay.
project ideas.
That's fine.
Project ideas are welcome now, but the list is supposed to be winnowed by in December. And the project ideas that are submitted are reviewed by the local planning committee and will be assessed for feasibility by the consultants and by the state agencies for their feasibility and kind of work through the process that way to winnow down a list into something realistic and things that are fundable.
Perfect.
If this and potential funding that we see the state might, we might be able to attract to this project and matching that and turning it into a package of something in the DRI and building the streetscape better to connect it, I think that's a fantastic idea and a really nice way to leverage that effort.
You guys should talk really soon in terms of making some sort of thing.
We could make a very quick diagram just showing, where there are existing pedestrian connections that need improvement, where there's existing sidewalks, where there aren't sidewalks, and you can very quickly see where the gaps are. And then showing how it meets this project, and this is kind of a catalyst to that whole network. I mean, the master plan in this project, it's about connectivity. And so connectivity in the street grid and through the existing parks is really important. I love all these new connections that were made.
And
We have four more access points.
One of the potential priority projects in the application is around the corner at the southeast corner of the North Bay, which is the shack site too. So there's a connection to something already in the DRI process there as well.
This may be opening up another can of worms, but I think of access and sidewalks and long-term planning, and the old Foster's refrigeration plant is probably a wasteland of a landfill itself. But eventually, I mean, that seems like a place where a walkway could go through that would access the shacks, Kite's Nest, I believe. I mean, I'm not looking at a map right now, so I'm not exactly
Well,
sure.
there is a right-of-way. The North 2nd Street is a 50-foot right-of-way, and the built-out road is, I think, 25 feet. So there's definitely, the road right-of-way exists, and, you know, so there's the space to develop the sidewalk is there now. And how you cross the Foster site, again, it's like the landfill. You have to work with DEC and make sure, you know, usually paving on top of something that's contaminated or disturbed is acceptable to DEC, so I don't see any reason why you know, with the street grid, you have the right of way. There's no reason not to formalize those sidewalk connections. And street striping too, you know, just having striping and signage, so it's not just having the sidewalk, it's also getting from one side to the other. You know, we're thinking, you know, long-term too, like if you have this trail from the park and you're getting people to the bridge, but you have semi-trucks going across, so you've got to, you know, maybe there's a bump or some striping, some signage to alert vehicles to all the different places that pedestrians are coming from. I think that's actually really important, is alerting vehicles to where pedestrians are, not just making the sidewalk itself.
Certainly.
And speed limits, things like that.
One last comment, please.
Yeah, briefly, because I had stated so many concerns. I want to say I really like your approach entirely. I think you're taking great care. I'm very excited about this, and best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have just one short, if it's okay. Also, thank you so much for all the time you spent on this. It's really amazing and exciting. I just one more time wanted to back up that for one, the sterility of the waterfront park is because of the design work and the materials used.
Yeah.
In our area, we have some different businesses I would love to see supported because they deal with pure material. It's a great green footprint. Whether or not we always like all their politics. Coloruso's does all gravel, sand. They have a sand quarry which has all the pebble sizes. They have a gravel quarry that crushes to higher sizes. We have a really good wood company that get wood products in the area that all the lumber could come from. We have soil plant, a Gromax. We have pure gold. And we have oh my God, one other one. No, that's it. But like already there for your landscape, that's a phenomenal amount of product, and it's green as heck. The footprint is under LED certified, or LEED, LED, and it just seems, I just want to push it again. It seems like often we cannot as much support our local industries as we can. And it'd be nice to see it happen.
We can write suppliers into specifications. That's part of doing part of this project will be contract specifications. So you can write suppliers in for public funding. It always has to be or approved equal. But if you write in a supplier that's close by, you know, it's easier to get than it is to go further. And we'll definitely look at local stone, and maybe that's, I think that's a really interesting avenue that we'll look at. Maybe we'll go get a few buckets full of samples for this next week. But,
and there are also stone quarries within 100 miles of here, not just gravel quarries across the river, bluestone.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. This is